Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving right into that chilling, incredibly relatable moment when you suddenly realize you are running your parents' legacy software. We're going to unpack the actual science behind why we act the way we do under pressure, and more importantly, how we can actually rewrite our core operating system.
So let me start off by asking you a question that's probably going to feel a little uncomfortable. When was the last time you said something to a child, and almost before the words even left your mouth, you realized it was the exact phrase your own parent used to say to you, right? And I don't just mean the words. I'm talking about the cadence, the pitch, that super specific, heavy sigh that always comes right before a stressed reaction to something totally mundane. Like the standard Tuesday evening chaos when a cup of juice gets knocked over onto the rug.
And this whole situation perfectly illustrates what we could call the universal manifesto of the 9-year-old. I mean, we've all been there, sitting in our childhood bedrooms, stewing over some perceived injustice, making these deeply dramatic promises to ourselves. We swear up and down we will never, ever say things like, "because I said so." And then, fast forward 3 decades, a cup of juice tips over, and boom, that manifesto just vanishes into thin air as those exact words fly out of your mouth. But here's the really incredible discovery. Freezing up over that spilled juice, it isn't a personal failure at all. You aren't betraying your 9-year-old self. You are actually just experiencing a deeply documented psychological phenomenon.
Let's get into Section 1, the science of intergenerational transmission.
Basically, researchers call this intergenerational transmission. You see, during your most formative developmental years, your brain is pretty much a giant sponge. It is specifically built to observe and catalog social and emotional survival strategies. It logs the way your parents responded to you, their discipline methods, their tone of voice, down to their tiny micro-expressions when they were stressed out. It's exactly like a background application being installed on your computer, totally without your permission. You don't get a little pop-up window asking if you accept the terms and conditions of your parents' stress responses. It just downloads.
Now, our understanding of how this process works has totally shifted over time. For the longest time, science was hyper-focused on the transmission of profound trauma. But then, a massive longitudinal study out of UC Berkeley completely changed the paradigm. By tracking families over decades, researchers found that the transmission mechanism itself is entirely neutral. So parents who had warm, secure childhoods, they passed those exact qualities right along. But on top of that, you're also passing down the most mundane, entirely neutral habits right alongside those huge emotional reactions, like the specific way you clear your throat, or the flick of your wrist when you fold a t-shirt, or even the route you take to the grocery store. These entirely neutral behaviors travel along the exact same neural pathways as your core conflict resolution skills.
Moving on to Section 2, the 1960s attachment blueprints.
To figure out where this root code is actually stored, we got to jump back in time to the origins of attachment theory in the 1960s. Before pioneers like John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth came along, psychology was totally dominated by behaviorism. Behaviorists viewed human connection as highly mechanical. It was basically a vending machine relationship, where children simply attached to whoever fed them. They literally told parents to give their toddlers a firm handshake in the morning so they wouldn't spoil them. I know, wild. But then Bowlby looked at children in the World War II era who were being fed and sheltered, yet were still failing to thrive. He realized the behaviorists had it dead wrong. Children actually have a profound biological and evolutionary need for emotional connection and a secure base. And then Mary Ainsworth measured this beautifully with her strange situation experiment. She didn't just observe how a child cried when a parent left the room, she looked at how they allowed themselves to be comforted when the parent came back.
So, the crucial takeaway here is how those reunions categorize children into 3 main attachment styles. First, secure attachment happens when a caregiver is consistently responsive, so the child learns the world is fundamentally a safe place. Then there's anxious attachment, which stems from inconsistent care, leaving the kid hypervigilant and clinging. And avoidant attachment develops when emotional needs are consistently dismissed, teaching the child that they just have to suppress their emotions to survive. But here is the real kicker for our explainer today. Those childhood attachment styles, they don't magically expire the day you turn 18. These 1960s toddler categories literally become your unrequested factory settings as an adult parent today.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 3 faces of default fatherhood. To understand how these decades-old blueprints map onto us today, we need to talk about the biology of stress. Picture this. It's a calm, easy Saturday morning. You have full access to your prefrontal cortex. That's the highly evolved part of your brain responsible for complex decision-making, deep empathy, and conscious thought. You are, in that moment, the ideal gentle parent. But
When that fourth cup of juice spills that week, cortisol immediately floods your system. Think of cortisol as this massive, gridlocked traffic jam on the bridge leading directly to your prefrontal cortex. Your brain experiences a sudden cognitive overload, and it quite literally cannot expend the energy to sit in that traffic. So what does it do? It takes a massive detour. It bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely and reroutes the electrical signal straight to the basal ganglia, which is your brain's primal habit center. It just hits play on the oldest, most reliable script it has on file. And that sudden neural detour usually manifests in one of three ways. First up is the echo. This is the direct one-to-one replication of your parents. You use the exact same words, and you basically give a flawless impression of the disappointed look your own dad gave you back in 1994. Second is the overcorrection. This happens when you identify a flaw in how you were parented, and you swing the pendulum completely in the opposite direction. Like if your dad never apologized, you apologize constantly, even when the toast is just slightly too crunchy. It totally comes from a loving place, but it's sneaky, because your actions are still completely dictated by your childhood. You're acting in opposition to a ghost, and a lot of times creating a brand new imbalance where the child feels responsible for regulating your constant guilt. And finally, we have the blank slate. This is typically for folks who grew up without a present parent. They're working with zero blueprint. Because the basal ganglia has no script to run, every single parenting decision requires intense, conscious, manual effort. And that leads to staggering cognitive load and massive, overwhelming burnout.
All right, let's get into Section 4, the 4 steps to rewire. Now that we know what the hardware glitch actually is, how do we fix it? Well, there is a clinical framework of conscious parenting that allows us to do exactly that. It's totally possible to rewrite your core operating system by mastering 4 things: the pause, the audit, the redo, and the amplify. Step 1 is the pause, and it requires exactly 3 seconds. Now I know 3 seconds might sound like some cheap clinical gimmick when your amygdala is screaming at you to establish immediate control over a kitchen covered in sticky juice. But listen, this is the literal biological speed required for an electrical signal to bypass that cortisol traffic jam we talked about and successfully boot up the prefrontal cortex. If you can force your mouth shut for just 3 seconds, logic and empathy actually come back online. You aren't magically calming yourself down. You're literally just buying the physiological time necessary for the smart part of your brain to power up.
Step 2 is the audit. You know, that late night hour of parental guilt when you're staring at the ceiling? Yeah, that's when this usually happens. You need to ask yourself 3 objective questions. What did I just do? Where have I seen that before? And did it actually help my kid? Now, this isn't just you agonizing in the dark for no reason. Conscious self-reflection physically stimulates the production of myelin. Myelin is this incredible fatty substance that insulates nerve fibers and makes electrical signals travel faster. So by engaging in the audit, you are physically wrapping fat around brand new conscious neural pathways. You're turning them from a bumpy dirt road into a superhighway that eventually becomes faster than that old basal ganglia detour. You are physically rebuilding your brain's hardware.
Step 3 is the redo. Look, you will inevitably fail at step 1 and 2 sometimes. It happens. The redo is the profound act of walking back to your kid and saying, hey, I didn't handle that well. I was frustrated. Can we try again? This carries massive emotional weight. It halts unchecked adult pride in real time. But more importantly, it teaches your kids that rupture and repair is a real, achievable thing. They learn that conflict doesn't mean the end of a relationship, which gives them incredible security for every future partnership they'll ever have. And step 4 is the amplify. This is the really good stuff. Remember that UC Berkeley study? Transmission works both ways. You also inherited absolutely wonderful things from your parents. The amplify is the conscious decision to take inventory of those positive traits and actively choose to install them. Maybe it's a parent who always showed up to your games, or maybe it's your dad's infuriatingly charming ability to deliver terrible jokes, like, asking why the dad brought a ladder to the bar because he heard the drinks were on the house. You can consciously choose to keep that positive, joyful legacy alive.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, choosing your family legacy.
There is a fantastic saying out there. The inheritance wasn't a choice, but the legacy is. Your childhood is always a silent passenger in the room with you, embedded in every single moment your amygdala responds to stress. You really can't outrun it. But hey, you don't have to be perfect either. Perfection is a total myth that just leads right back to overcorrection. You didn't choose those 1960s emotional blueprints handed to you in a crib, but simply doing the work to be a conscious parent, engaging with these uncomfortable truths and actually auditing your default patterns, that puts you miles ahead. What you pass forward is entirely up to you.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. Tomorrow morning over breakfast, when you look at your child, ask yourself this. What brand new, entirely original factory settings are you lovingly installing right now for the generations of your family you will never even live to meet? Your software update begins tomorrow morning. Thanks so much for exploring this with us.